episode 62 of the Author Stories podcast. This week's guest is Rob Bell. I'm your host, Hank Garner, and you can find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com. Thanks for joining me over this past year as I've brought you show after show each week full of encouragement and information. I hope you'll go listen to the archives and then drop me a note at authorhankgarner@outlook.com to let me know what you think of the show. Please take just a moment to rate the show on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. I appreciate all of you that have done so lately. It has been a huge help. Also, there's an Amazon link in the right-hand sidebar of hankgarner.com. Please click on that before you do your Amazon shopping, and the show gets a small commission, and it helps us do what we do and bring you new information and content each and every week. Also, stay tuned. We're launching a second podcast this week. More information of that coming soon. It'll also be at hankgarner.com. Without further ado, here's Rob Bell. Rob Bell is with me. Rob is an author, speaker, pastor, content creator of all sorts, and and it's a pleasure to have you on the show, Rob. Welcome.
Oh, it's great. My pleasure to be there.
Yeah. So I start every show with a variation of the same question, and the question is, and I'm going to expand this a little bit for you because you cover so many bases, but the question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer, or for you, what is your first memory of wanting to be a content creator and to share a message with someone?
Oh, I was in the back of English class in high school, and I sat next to Scott Reeder, who is the bass player for the band Puddle Slug. Although the band changed their name to Trusty Kleenex later on to appeal to more fans.
Of course they did.
And I would do just sketches, like stupid little pen sketches with like quotes and one line of dialogue for a character that I drew. But I don't know how to draw, so they were really raw stick figure drawings and bad drawings of houses. Like, I don't know how to draw, but I would, just keep coming up with funny statements and weird turns of phrases, but I didn't have any context for it. You know what I mean? I wasn't in an art world. I wasn't in a drama music world. I just knew that stuff kept bubbling up. And then when I was in college, I joined a band. My friends and I had a band, and I wrote the lyrics. And that was the first time I created something and then shared it with people. And when the crowd would sing back the lyrics, because we recorded our songs onto cassettes, actually, it was like gold. It was like, oh, I could create something, and a song needed a hook, it needed a chorus. I loved the crafting of lyrics. And then when I preached my first sermon when the band broke up, as all good college bands do,
right.
I saw the sermon as an art form, as like a long-lost art form that had been hijacked by fundraising and politics and narrow propaganda, but that originally the sermon was inspiring, it was provocative, it made you think, it was convicting, it made your soul soar, and I had this defining moment, like, I'm going to resurrect this art form, and I'm going to create, and I'm going to create, that's what I'm going to do with my life. It was that straightforward of a moment.
This guerrilla theater, I think I've heard you call it.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. There was something about working on having something to say, and then a crowd would gather and unleashing it in their midst and seeing what happened. I'm more enamored with this art form than ever, 25 years later.
Our mutual friend Jay Moore and I were talking, and we were talking about stand-up comedy and how a comic will craft these jokes and these stories with the hopes that they connect with someone, and then you perform this in front of a crowd, and you get immediate response, being positive, negative, and he talked about the crowd as your editor. What was that like when you started crafting lyrics? And did you have any hope that these would resonate with people the way they did? And then when you actually perform them in front of people and you get that feedback, what, as an artist, is that like?
It's the greatest feeling in the world. It's just so great. I was hooked. It felt like it felt like it was coming from somewhere in me, and people were the poet Mark Nepo has this great line about being human is what happens when I look far enough inside of you that I see myself.
Wow.
That there is this thing that happens when you have connected enough with somebody that you find yourself in them. And that's the powerful thing about art, is you're writing and pulling things out of deep from within yourself, and then other people say, hey, that's me too. And it was the solidarity of making something that somehow resonated with who I was and what I was thinking and feeling and learning, and then watching other people connect with it. It got me hooked. It's still... I was doing this show at this club near my house Saturday night, and I did an hour and 15 minutes of new content. And there was a moment at the end when I had this one line that the line was, who can bear the weight of their own life? And the line was, I was talking about when a friend of mine had took his own life several weeks ago, and I was telling about that, and then being a parent, and then just how our own lives, sometimes the heaviness can be overwhelming unless you have practices that sort of release valves that rescue you from all that heaviness. But it was so fascinating, that line, who can bear the weight of their own life? The crowd laughed. Is that interesting?
That is interesting. That's crazy.
I thought it would be like
a somber moment.
Like because I was talking about how the modern world is so good at explanations. Mm-hmm. Google has an algorithm for everything, but that when it comes to the heart, when it comes to suffering, loss, pain, euphoria, joy, lots of the human experience can't be explained. It's deeply mysterious. And so in the modern world, what happens is explanations built the modern world, but the same muscles and the same framework that built this incredible modern world with its luxuries and technologies, it doesn't often know what to do with the depths of human experience. So I thought the line at that moment, an hour and 3 minutes in, would have this sort of, yes, that is the question. But instead, because of the couple of pieces that were before it, that line became like the relief moment. You know what I mean?
Right.
When everybody went, yes, you're right. You're right. That is true. My own life is like, it's got too much heaviness at times, and I need, and so often we deal with that heaviness with all sorts of addictions and destructive behaviors instead of practices that help us deal with that. But even that, like what you're talking about, crafting something, working really hard at it, and then in the moment finding out that its power was a very different power than what I thought it would have. That's like part of the joy is, oh, that's what that is. How great is, oh, so great.
and it's disarming sometimes to,
Yes.
I'll read book reviews of things that I've written, and people connect with things that honestly I thought was a throwaway line, or
Yes.
it's something that was funny to me, and it was absolutely not funny to them. It's really deep and heartfelt, and it's crazy when the art separates itself from the artist and becomes something completely different.
Yes. Yes. It is the great, great mystery of the creative process is you I just do my podcast in one take. So if my kids need car keys or need to know where I put the soccer ball, they just come in and ask me, and then I keep going. And you would not believe the number of people who are like, dude, 3 weeks ago when your son Preston came in and that was awesome.
That's great. That's great. Well, and as artists, and especially with social media, and I guess it's gone on forever, even before social media. We want to craft this persona, and we all put our face forward that we want the world to believe that we are, and sometimes you just need to let your guard down and just just be you and let life happen around you. I think people connect with that so much more.
Yeah, and I actually I think that when people giving the idea of a persona too much power or energy works against authentic work. So when people are like, I'm just trying to figure out what my brand is, or I just want to make sure that my persona, you can work really, really hard to fabricate some particular image, and people will decide for themselves. You know what I mean? Like the work is the point. The gift you're giving people. I've met people who haven't created anything who have spent more energy trying to figure out how they're going to be perceived. Right. And if they would have spent 10% of that energy doing the work, then you wouldn't. If you have energy to think about your persona, you've probably already lost the plot. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, how is your book going to be perceived? Who knows? The only control you have over that is actually writing a good book.
That's right. And you can spend a year on platform building, and when someone reads that book, they're still going to make the connections that they're going to make, no matter how much you have led them on the front end. So just quit pretending and just
absolutely
put the book out. Yeah. Let's backpedal just a minute. Did you grow up in a creative home?
There was piano lessons, but no, it wasn't. My parents weren't in the arts. My mom, though, had an English background, teaching English, so she always had an eye for good writing, good reading, good grammar. Lots of jokes about her correcting our grammar exist to this day. So there was an appreciation for literature for sure. And my dad made, like, crafting in the yard, doing house projects. When he wasn't doing his job, he was always building or making something. And there'd be I wanted a soccer goal. So he took some old wood from a barn that had been torn down and made a soccer goal. And then he used baling twine, like from a combine on a farm, to make the netting. So I remember...
That's hardcore.
There was like an industriousness. There was like nails and wood, and I was never good at making stuff. I'm still to this day fascinated with sculptors, and especially interior designers and architects. I was never able to make stuff with my hands. I could never get things to be what they were in my head. I remember taking an art professor in college saying to him, I can't get the clay to do what I want it to do, but I can get words to do what I want them to do. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
It's like this defining moment when I was like, I just cannot. Physical mediums, I can't get them to submit. But not that words submit, but words were just way more pliable. Like, I could get words crafted in such a way that I went, that's what I'm trying to convey.
Did you have a similar connection with music? I know you played in bands.
You know what? I sort of hit, to this day, I screw around with drums and bass and guitars and write music and songs, but I hit my there are people who are just such great musicians. I was just around such great musicians that quite early on I was like, I don't have that thing they have. Like I can bang out a 3-chord punk song that will make you laugh with a good hook, but it's hack at best.
Right.
And my 15-year-old son is already doing things on the guitar that's like, that thing. I like hit my ceiling pretty early. So now it's just loud and happy.
Gotcha. So your wife and you founded this church, Mars Hill Bible Church.
Yeah.
And there's this phenomenal story about the rise of this thing. And you guys were fairly young. And what was it like having to, and I'm not talking about the leadership so much, as what was it like for you being responsible each week for bringing something fresh and new to this group of people that showed up at your door and you were air quote responsible for? What is that like to have to create something new each week? And I think that a lot of people don't understand the weight that goes along with that. We can take 6 months or a year to craft a book when folks, pastors and such, have to get up each week and craft something new, hopefully.
Right.
Anyway. Yeah. What was that like for a young a young leader with that responsibility and that weight on you?
Well, and I was those sermons were 45 minutes and memorized every week. And I was bringing in live animals and hanging stuff from the ceiling, and I'd have actors planted in the audience. They were like guerrilla theater meets performance art, meets a recovery meeting, meets a TED Talk, meets a revival. I don't know. So I raised the bar really high. And at first it was great, then it was really hard, and then it got great towards the end. At first it was great because I knew that people are hungry and we want to learn, we want to be inspired, we want to be challenged. So at first, when the church started, the sermons it was just joy to be doing. I mean, I was 28, 29, 30. It was such joy to be turned loose, to do the thing I know I'm here to do. You know what I mean? It was just adrenaline. It was just, I was reenacting the Day of Atonement. I had 80-year-old women sewing me costumes to show people, to illustrate this story from the 1300s that connected with this poem. And then you know what I mean? Like these were like one-man productions kind of. But then what happened is the church kept growing. So it was, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 people. And that had a whole structure, a leadership structure. At one point, there were 80 staff and 2,000 volunteers and 3 services on Sunday. I had to do the sermon 3 times.
And all of a sudden, guerrilla theater becomes an institution.
Well, it's like there were 2 hats. There was the creative teacher, the art dimension of creating these experiences for people, and then there was the leadership of a large institution with a multi-million-dollar budget, and we were giving away, I think at one point we were giving 40% of the offerings beyond ourselves to projects around the world to help the poor and to start microfinance banks. I mean, this thing got big and wide and complicated fast. And my true self, I knew that I was here to do the creativity work, the teaching work. But the problem in Western culture is for many people, the person up front doing the teaching has to also be the leader. You know what I mean?
Right.
Those two are often the same. Well, you know about this. Often the same hat. So I got bogged down to where I was in meetings and then sort of pulling off the teaching stuff at the I always felt like I was just scraping the bucket. I didn't have the time or space to really create, and that got very, very difficult. I had some bad burnouts where my body was just like, we're done. This pace is undoable. And then I gradually began to have the strength and courage to say, this is my work, and we're going to have to bring in people to do these other tasks. And I left there like 4 years ago, but the last 3 years there were I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, and we had other really great, competent people doing the other things, and that was downright fun. That was really great.
Now, along the way, while you're pastoring, you started doing these live events outside the church.
Oh yeah, I started touring. Yeah,
you started touring, and you would do these productions like Everything is Spiritual.
Yeah.
And you did one 6 or 7 years ago, maybe.
2006.
Where you had the giant whiteboard, the giant rectangular whiteboard.
Yes,
and
that was 9 years ago, 2006.
9 years ago.
And then this past summer, I did.
You did it again with a triangle, didn't you?
Part 2 one with all new content, and then there was a tour called Gods Aren't Angry, and there was a tour called Drops Like Stars about creativity and suffering, and then there was a UK tour called Calling All Peacemakers. Yeah, those are fun.
Yeah. So why did you decide to tour these things? You're pastoring this church. You've got a thing going on, and then you decide to do this huge one-man show. Every night for these extended tours. Like
right.
What was this itch that you had to scratch to do that?
and the first Everything Spiritual was 25 American cities in 28 days.
Man, that's like the Rolling Stones wish they could keep up like that.
It started because I had been reading a bunch of quantum physics, and I started making all these connections with Hebrew poetry, and like you do, and I started like, wait, I started crafting this talk message experience, and it just kept getting bigger to where it was like, this would take like an hour and a half to do this. And it was one of those things like, if you're going to do this, do it right, but I should do it a bunch of times. You don't do that just once. Right. And then it became, what if I just did it in a different city every night? And then a friend of mine is a drummer in a band, and he introduced me to his booking agent, and I just said, I'd love to do a club tour of like small theaters and clubs, and I'd love to do this hour and a half talk thing. And it makes me laugh to think about this booking agent being like, what? This pastor wants to go out on the road and do clubs? I remember the White Stripes were out that summer, so I was often two or three nights behind them, because there's only a certain way you can route around the country, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like the summer of 2006. So that's how it came about. It was like, let's put tickets up and see. And then and part of it, the larger issue, to answer your question, was I wanted to take this art form out of the Sunday morning church and let it be in the spaces where we experience other art forms, comedians, bands, theater, plays. I wanted to see how far this art form could be taken. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to free it so that all the people who would never go to a church service could experience it on its own terms. And I wanted to see if you put it in a club and you free it from, this is a church service, you will have a spiritual experience. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you strip some of those presuppositions away, do you free people then to actually have authentic experiences? Is there a chance that for some people that will just be the doorway in? Like, oh, I never would have expected that. And that's what, and so I just did one this summer, and we're actually getting ready to plan one for next year, and I love it. Really.
What is the preparation like to put on something like that? Because if you're going to do this 25 cities in 28 days, and you of course understand the notes that you need to hit. The point, and with especially with something like everything is spiritual. When you get to the end, there are callback moments that you really needed to be paying attention in the beginning to understand. And so this is. I can only imagine what your planning process is for this.
And actually, with that
I'm
first
sorry.
one, I'm sorry I interrupted.
No.
With that first one, with that first everything is spiritual, I ended filling a notebook with content, and then I remember that one ended up being 102 3x5 cards, and I laid them all out. I cleared out the furniture and laid them all out on the living room floor, and then began to move the cards around to work through sort of flow. Because to do an hour and a half on stage, you're creating tension, you're alleviating tension, there's an emotional resonance. You can't hit one note the whole time. You have to move around among the notes.
Right.
And I just, hour after hour, just kept working with how does this feel, and then where do the callbacks come, and how far apart are they, and when are they paced, and that's all. And the thing I did a couple nights ago at this club was an hour and 15 minutes, and it started with a story of something that happened to me in 2007. So it's a story that happened 8 years ago that I've never done anything with. And it was the same sort of thing, just over and over again, working with the pacing, the tone, where will people be at this moment? Do I go here? Do I go there? And then sometimes you know where it ends, and you know where it starts, but you don't know how to get there. Sometimes you know exactly how it starts. You just have no idea where it ends. This week's podcast I was working on this morning, it'll probably be an hour long, 45 minutes long, and it'll be all fresh, new content. And I instantly knew where it started, and I instantly knew where it ends. But like some of the middle section, just this morning began to sort of arrange itself. You know what I mean? Like, follows that, follows that, follows that. Almost like when you write a narrative, when they leave the house, they get in the car. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, that's what happens next.
Well, I was going to say, you talk about speaking and preaching the way a novelist talks about structuring their narrative. So is this does this take shape in your mind in the same kind of way?
Absolutely, and I storyboard it. A lot of times I'll just storyboard, and I
love that.
Draw triangles, circles, squares, lines, left to right across the middle of a big piece of paper. And this is a scene. And then it's going to move to this next scene. So I'm going to tell this story about my neighbor Alfie. And then I'm going to do that whole who can bear the weight of their own life. But to get out of the Alfie story, there's this one line that will move us into the next section. And then we'll move to the next scene. And the audience won't have it announced to them as scenes, but they will subtly, subconsciously be moving along, which is why they won't, why they'll pay attention, is because I will have thought this through in order to give them hopefully the best kind of gift where they go for a ride with me and we see what happens. You know what I mean? So yeah, right. A lot of times storyboarding. What's interesting, I wrote a novel a couple years ago, and I loved writing a novel because it was all of the joy of what I do without needing to make sense.
I love
you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Like everything is spiritual, or my normal work. There's a thread of logic. I'm building a case, or I'm taking you somewhere. I'm borrowing from history, philosophy, theology, anthropology. I'm giving you a brief history about how the Hubble telescope showed us that the universe is expanding, or whatever it is. But when I wrote my first novel, it was like I didn't have to have any of that rigorous, does this make sense? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could just be all of the same storyboarding, what happens next, but I could just make it up with such little attention to logic or reason.
Yeah. It's like the astrophysicist who lets his hair down and watches Star Wars.
Yes, exactly. Boy, yeah. So I realized with that question you asked, oh, that's what was happening. That's why it was so fun. It was all of the storyboarding. What happens next? Where do we go? But I could just make up the rules, as opposed to my normal work, which is I'm actually trying to convey something that has to work at a number of levels. Among them, intellectually, you have to buy it.
Right. Around the time that you were pastoring and doing these one-man shows, for lack of a better word, you also started writing books. And my wife and I were sitting there trying to tally up your books earlier, and there were several. What made you was Velvet Elvis the first one?
Yes.
And what made you want to write that book?
I noticed when I was out speaking that certain content just like connected, had like a certain energy to it. And there were certain bits I would do in sermons that just had their own unique energy. And I noticed people would repeat them, and some of the hooks people would refer months later. And when I thought about those different pieces, I realized that they could form like a coherent thread. Like, oh, that could be a book. That could be... And I had done this whole thing on a Velvet Elvis painting that I'd gotten in college as a metaphor for theology, and how with art we keep painting. Like, no one says, I've painted the last painting. There's no more need to paint. The very nature of art is exploration. You keep painting, you keep writing songs, you keep writing novels. And that for many people, when they thought about spirituality, they were handed static models, which were essentially, we've painted the painting, so just keep painting, just keep hanging the same painting in your living room, as opposed to, of course, we're going to keep exploring. And that sort of idea was big enough that a bunch of different ideas fit within it. This idea of faith as exploration, faith as art. And so then it was just figuring out the order. And that book came together relatively, it was very, very hard work because I hadn't written a book. And probably 90% of that book was head games. You know what I mean? Yeah. Am I a writer? Am I any good at this? Other people are actually writers. You know what I mean? Yeah. Just all that doubt and all that. What am I doing trying to write a book? There are actual authors who actually know how to write books. Just staring at that blinking line like, what in the world? And then over time you just realize, just make it. Stop wondering whether what you're doing and just make it. But all the great ones just started typing. They didn't wonder whether or not they were good enough. They just started typing.
Right. What was it like releasing that book into the world and then waiting for a response, as opposed to you crafting the sermon or this stage show, and then you get immediate feedback?
Yeah, the writing alone was challenging because I didn't have any cues. You're all alone in your house.
Right.
You're sitting at a laptop, sitting at a computer, and you don't know what you have on your hands. All you know is to it's like a totally different set of reliances because you're just relying on your own sense that this works. This works on the page. I want to turn the page. So that took a long time. And then when it came out and I was just so unbelievably gratified that it got the reaction it did. It was just extraordinary because you're left without your normal speaking feedback, which is it's working or it's not.
Right. Did you immediately want to follow that up with another book, or did you wait for inspiration to come for another one?
No, I already had a bunch of ideas in my head. And that's how it is now. There's like 5 books in my head. There's 2 complete books in my computer right now that haven't been really 3 in my computer right now. It's just weird. Just so much. And I'm every time I finish a book, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take a break. then the next ideas are already there, and they're yelling, they're announcing themselves. I'm a book. Write me.
Yeah. And then you've done several books since then, including this one called Drops Like Stars that is phenomenal mix of art, and it's such a beautiful book.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And
that one.
And then you followed that up with a book that hit the New York Times bestseller list, and also has the distinction of being the only book on the New York Times that never received any criticism. And that's Love Wins. Would you speak for just a moment about dealing with criticism, and you can talk what you want to about that project if you want to. It's but how do you deal with people that on one hand you've got people that completely accept what you're saying and love what you do, and then people over here that are just screaming from the rooftops? How do you balance those things with what you feel your calling is, or that you're being true to what you're supposed to do? That's a loaded question,
Well,
I know.
Not loaded at all. If somebody doesn't like my book, then it probably wasn't for them. So I don't Google my name. I don't find that I don't find a chorus of people who don't like what I'm doing. It's just not interesting at all to me. And any energy that I would give to that is energy that would be taken away from the work that I am doing that brings me great joy and may actually mean something to other people. So honestly, it's not a part of my life. It's like refrigerator buzz. If you're quiet enough, you could probably in your kitchen hear the refrigerator buzzing. You know what I mean? But but otherwise you just go about your day because you're there to get some food and be on your, you know what I mean? Like that's why you're in the kitchen, not to hear the refrigerator buzz. I just don't find it interesting. And sometimes the criticism is actually validation. These people are upset, but their thing is, for example, in the book I talk about heaven and hell. A number of people were handed a view of the universe and told, if you're not this particular religion and you haven't said the prayer, done the whatever it is, the correct way, then everybody who hasn't done that is going to die and be punished in hell forever by God. And then they call that good news. That's a horror story. Billions of people suffering forever is a horror story. That's not good news. And so some people were handed this view of the universe. There's no way the psyche can bear that. That is fundamentally communicating to you that the universe is an unsafe place. And that has devastating consequences for a person's life. So I don't think that's right. I don't think you should load an 11-year-old kid down with this idea that if you don't do things right, you could burn forever. That is so bad. You know what I mean? So the book comes from a place of great passion. There are other ways to think about the world. There are other ways to think about love. And so sometimes the criticism just hurts because you're completely misunderstood. You're slandered by people who've never met you, people who've never read your book publicly.
Yeah.
So some of it's just people are scared and they have very, very small, terrible views of themselves and their friends and neighbors and the world they live in, and it gets expressed at sort of inopportune moments. Other times, so sometimes it hurts, sometimes it's just sad, and then sometimes it validates your work. You're like, oh, people do need to get rescued from some of these views. I mean, there are people who were taught growing up that the earth doesn't matter, that we're all going to go somewhere when we die and get out of here, so it doesn't matter what we do to the earth. But the reality is human beings are living on the earth in an unsustainable way. We are causing visible, proven damage to our universe and to our world, and we have serious issues of human beings surviving on planet Earth. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Some of these views have very, very destructive real-world consequences, and so you speak out and you give people a better view and you try to rescue people from some of these perspectives. So criticism brings up a lot of different issues, but ultimately, you have to know what you're doing. If you don't know who you are and what you're doing, so with that book, I was trying to rescue people from some really destructive ideas and give them some new ways to think about who they are and what they're doing here. If you don't know who you are and what you're doing here, then criticism may be really, really damaging because it calls into question the whole thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've often found that if people aren't clear on why they do what they do, then criticism can be very disorienting and defeating. And it doesn't need to be. You just need to do that other kind of work.
Well, and my experience is that there's different levels of criticism. There were a certain group of people that argued against that book from a theological perspective, and there are different theological perspectives. People come to their own conclusions, and that's an entirely different argument. But then there are like personal attacks. And I have found that those personal attacks are rarely about you.
Absolutely.
It's usually something that entirely different that has nothing to do with you.
Yes, very true.
Yeah.
If you get worked up in either direction.
Right.
And a lot of praise. It's so nice for people to resonate with the work and to be so excited about what you've done. But the praise, you have to hold it all loosely.
Yeah. The saying is you don't believe your 5-star reviews or your 1-star reviews.
Yes.
The truth is in there in the middle
somewhere. You just let it all be what it is.
Yeah.
But the number, I was talking to somebody recently, or what was they saying? They went on their Facebook page and they were answering all their critics on their Facebook page, and this person got angry and started saying this, and then it was like...
Yeah, that never ends
I was like, why are you debating on Facebook? Well, it's because it's my page. I was like, I know it's your page, but you have nothing better to do? Like you really did wake up in the morning and given anything to do with the day, you had little 3-sentence arguments without facial feature exchange. You know what I mean? Without tone of voice, without context, without even knowing who this person is, because they don't even use their name. They have like a weird little code name, and their picture is of a dog. You know what I mean? You are having 3-sentence bullets fired back and forth between you and somebody whose avatar is a poodle. And you now feel defeated about the future of humanity and wondering why people are so depraved. You asked for that. I got to be honest.
Right.
Your system is perfectly designed to achieve the results that you are obtaining.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So how can people understand that they're doing what they're supposed to do so that the criticism... you said if you're doing what you're supposed to do, then the criticism doesn't matter. How do you know that?
Oh, because the first thing, the joy is in the work. Like when you write your books, you write them because you love writing them. Like when you told me, it's because that's where your feet take you in the morning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like something deep within you, it resonates at that note. Like this is your work in the world. And you love the work even when it's hard. I always talk about it's the exotic cocktail of exhilarating and exhausting. It's good tired. So when you fall in bed at night and you're like, I'm so tired, but it's good tired.
Right.
And you know you're onto something when the results are the frosting on the cake. You know what I mean? Like the work was the cake. The work was the joy. You got to do that today. And often, I talk about the difference between craft and success in my new book. Craft is when you say, can you believe I get to do this? Success is when you're caught up in, what can I get now? Success loves numbers, because success usually is living in the past or the future. It's resting on what it did, or it's obsessed with trying to get more. craft is when you see that you're doing work that it humbles you, it invigorates you, it gets you up in the morning. You feel like you're endlessly learning new subtleties and nuances. You're shaping, you're forming. That's the beauty of craft. And all kinds of work can be seen as craft. It's as much a mindset as anything. But I meet people sometimes and I know right away they're stuck in the success game. You know what I mean? They're telling you all that they did. They're announcing to you all of their achievements. They've got a bio. They're listing this and that. Ugh, please. What's really interesting is when you meet somebody who they're doing their thing and they keep learning and growing and they have this sense of satisfaction. This is my work in the world. You see it in a mom. I've seen it in insurance agents, real estate agents. Like, I help people find a home. You know what I mean? They even speak of what they do with a certain nobility and dignity. And that's contagious. So that's one of the things is you realize that you're working a craft and you're never going to get to the end of it. And that's the joy of it.
That's awesome. The latest book that you have out is one that you co-authored with your wife, Kristen, The Zim-Zum of Love. Up until this point, what you had done has been kind of a solitary practice.
Yeah.
What was that like, sitting down with your wife and co-authoring a book?
We sat down every day at 9 a.m. for 18 months and wrote that book. And we're still married. It was great. It was very difficult, and it was really bonding. Partly because we had set up for the beginning certain parameters. This is not a cheesy self-help marriage book. We want to talk about the mysteries of marriage. So there's going to have a conceptual dimension to it. We want to talk about the deeper mysteries of sharing your life with someone and the space between you, how this space is generative, how it's exclusive, some of the natures of the space. So we had this ancient idea that we were working with, but then we also wanted it to have a number of hooks that people could read it and immediately have things to discuss. And then we didn't want it to be a how-to book, like at the end of this chapter, turn, face your lover, and tell them 6 things. You know what I mean? We were like, oh, throw up in my mouth. So,
right. But
it had to have some element of practicality. And we had just seen marriage talked about in so often it was so cheesy what we'd seen. Like, you just want to roll your eyes and throw up in your mouth. So we were sort of, how do we write something for everybody who would never read a marriage book? And something that would go beyond how do you stay together, but something about the deep, profound stream you are swimming in, the mystery you are entering into when you share your life with someone. So it's like we had these sort of conceptual parameters we were working with, and then we wanted it to be a short book. So we wanted it to be very deep and profound, but very lean and mean, because if you buy a book for your partner, the first thing you're going to do is hold that book and be like, I can't get through this. You know what I mean? So it had to be, oh yeah, I could get through this. I could totally get through. I could totally read this book. This is a thin little book. So part of it was Mark Twain said, if I would have had more time, I would have said less. The really hard work of condensing and boiling it down without sacrificing content. And that was what just took month after month after month.
I was going to say that kind of goes against, you think sitting down 18 months to write a book, this is going to be a 400,000 word behemoth.
Nope.
But taking the time to trim and narrow and get down to the essence of the story, that's brilliant.
And I always hack out. I just hacked out 10,000 words out of my new book. I'm actually going for less word count rather than more, because I am trying to get it so lean and mean and dense that you will turn the page and then turn the page and then turn the page. I want you to read the whole book, and I want it to feel like one quote after another. I don't want to waste any time. I don't want to waste any of your time, and that takes way more work. I just spent a couple of weeks taking out thousands and thousands and thousands of words. because that to me is the real last step. That is the real hard work, is hacking out all that fluff.
And that's a constant fight with ego to trim out things that you already said, because the natural inclination is, I said this, it's brilliant. Why would I take it out?
Well, it's interesting if you were, and the interviews we did about the book, it was really interesting whenever Kristen was asked, what did you learn about writing your first book with Rob? I mean, what was interesting to you? And she said, every time she was asked, she said that I wasn't precious with the content. Like if a paragraph didn't work, I would just hit delete or put it somewhere else. You can't, well, you know this from writing, you can't, if your ego is like, oh, but I said that. Over the years, if you just take that and cut and paste it and put it in somewhere else, when you're making lots of things over the years, you aren't precious with it because it'll come up somewhere else. You know what I mean? Yeah. You created that scene in the bar with the lady with the one leg and the bicycle out front. Weird example, by the way. It'll end up somewhere else. You know that over the years. Never sweat getting rid of it, because 6 years from now you'll be like, I wonder who should be there in the bar. How about a one-legged lady who came in on a bike? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So
kill your darlings.
Part of it, you cannot get precious. You have to be ruthless about stuff. If it's B plus, sorry, thanks for playing. It may be A plus content in some other context, but in this book, in this chapter, that story and goes. And the truth is, when you start jettisoning good content, now you know you're onto something. When good scenes hit the editing room floor, now you know you have a good movie.
Yeah. Well, what's the cliche that good is the enemy of best?
Absolutely.
Or good enough, or however it goes. Yeah.
Think of how many books you've read where you think, if they had taken 2/3 of this book out, it would have been better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or think about how many books you've read where at the end of the intro chapter, they then gave you a paragraph on each of the upcoming chapters and what it's about and why it matters. And you're like, why are you spending 2 pages telling me what each of the future chapters are about? If I'm reading your book and I'm interested, just let me read the second chapter. You know what I mean?
Because they're scared to death you won't read it because they haven't done a good enough job
Exactly.
already.
And if the first chapter had just been, I just kept turning the pages because they had me, we wouldn't have to do any of this. So part of it is just your ruthless, like laser-like focus. Is it working for you? Is it humming on the page? Is it true to the thing you're trying to do? And then trust that people will feel that and they'll stay with you.
Rob, what do you do to ensure that your children are creative, or is that something that you consciously think about?
Well, kids are going to do whatever they want. So we have always talked to them about how you create your life. The creativity is not art and paint and music. Creativity is, the whole thing is an act of creation. What kind of life you create. And that you have way more power to create your life than you realize. So what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? What do you want to explore? For us, it's always been much more about curiosity than anything else. What are you curious about? What do you want to see? What's interesting to you? And try to support them in that. You want to go visit what? Oh, okay. Let's figure that one out. So my one son, politics. He loves politics. So we never stop discussing. He's always showing me articles, and so I just join him in his curiosity. My other son, it's music. So we go see bands. We have this back house where do my work. We have drums, bass, guitars, and we make a lot of noise back here. So we've always said that curiosity is underrated and calling is overrated. You probably do lots of different things in your life.
Right.
So the really interesting question is, what's the thing that you're dying to find out what it is? And that'll probably lead you to all sorts of really interesting work in the world.
I love it. Rob, what's one piece of advice that you would give to someone who is thinking about pursuing their dream but just doesn't have the courage or is scared? What would you? What piece of advice or challenge would you give someone?
I would say that there are two risks. And let's say you're doing something, but you're wondering about this other thing, and it's keeping you awake at night, and you got a little tremble, like, man, oh man, you're dying to try this other thing. The thing that you have to understand is that there are two risks. There's the risk of trying this new thing, because you could fail, there could not be enough money, it could not work. But not trying it is a risk as well. Because some people will say, well, I'm dying in this job. I just want another life. I want another job. I want to do something else. But that new job trying something else would be risky. Well, so is dying in your current job. That's fairly risky as well. And the problem is a number of people were told, take risks. Go for it. You can do it. And so that sounds like it's a choice between taking a risk and not taking a risk. But it's not. You are always navigating two different risks. Stay here, keep doing this, and run the risk that something inside me dies of curiosity, or taking that next risk. And if people can embrace that, it's all a risk. Doing nothing and staying perfectly safe is a risk as well. And sometimes that's the better risk. You know what I mean? Sometimes you should stay where you are. But how often I've met people who are just restless, wondering about what would happen if they moved to Cleveland and tried that new thing. I don't know why I picked Cleveland. Bangladesh. And I've watched more people when you go, oh, you realize that staying is a risk too, because right now you're miserable. Yeah, but my kids are in good schools and I have a nice house. Okay, now you're really at risk. You're at risk of sacrificing your soul and your joy for some sort of thing that you've decided is the goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wallpaper and draperies and cable TV. Like, come on.
Yeah. Your comfort has become precious.
It's all a risk. And if you can see it as all a risk, and then then now you can do some interesting stuff.
That's great. Rob, thank you for taking this hour to be on the show. Tell everyone where they can connect with you to find out about your speaking gigs, your podcast, your books coming up.
Yeah, my robbell.com, my site has all sorts of info about what I'm up to next. You can see my weekly podcast. Last week I interviewed Oprah, which was very, very funny. So the Robcast is weekly. That's on the website. There's a new book coming out early next year called How to Be Here. And the Drops Like Stars coffee table book that you mentioned, that's going to be... Yeah. I have some of the first copies of that we just got a hold of, so that'll be available in a couple weeks on the site. And that's what we're doing. It's good times.
Cool. What about this novel that you talked about?
There's a chance that we're making some plans to release it on the interweb in the near future. So look for that, and I hope it makes you laugh very hard.
Oh, I look forward to it. I really do. Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it, and we'll send everybody to see you.
Excellent. Thanks.